Syrian forces continue to make gains in the rebel-held areas of Aleppo. It comes as rival UN resolutions to end the bombing of the besieged city failed. Al-Awajah district was the latest to fall to troops loyal to President Bashar al-Assad. Just over 2 weeks after the renewed assault on Aleppo following the collapse of a ceasefire, regime forces are advancing street by street into the eastern part of the city. The battle for Aleppo is central to the 5-year-long conflict. The government had been based in the centre and west of the city, and the latest gains shift the front line.
Well, the situation in Syria is catastrophic, and every day that goes by, we see the results of the regime by Assad in partnership with the Iranians on the ground, the Russians in the air, bombarding places, in particular Aleppo, where there are hundreds of thousands of people, probably about 250,000 still left. And there is a determined effort by the Russian Air Force to destroy Aleppo in order to eliminate the last of the Syrian rebels who were really holding out against the Assad regime.
I am confident that Assad's days are numbered.
The world will not waver. Assad must go.
We both agree that Assad needs to go.
It is just further evidence that Assad has to go.
He is no longer legitimate and that he needs to go.
For the sake of the Syrian people, the time has come for him to step aside.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow has the means to protect its assets in Syria if the United States decided to bomb the Syrian government. Lavrov noted that he has heard targeting Syrian forces as one of the options being advocated by some policymakers in Washington. He says the Russian military has 2 bases in Syria and air defense systems to protect its assets.
During an interview Sunday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said he has detected increasing U.S. hostility towards Moscow. He complained about a series of aggressive U.S. steps that threatened Russia's national security. In the interview with Russian state TV, Lavrov made it clear he blamed the Obama administration for what he described as a sharp deterioration in U.S.-Russian ties. With relations between Moscow and Washington strained over issues from Syria to Ukraine, Lavrov reeled off a long list of Russian grievances against the United States. He added that in some ways the atmosphere is more dangerous and unpredictable than the Cold War.
It was a day of rage in Yemen's capital Sana'a. Hours before, warplanes from a Saudi Arabian-led coalition had bombed a funeral gathering in the city, killing more than 140 people and injuring more than 500 others. Protesters outside the UN building railed against an international community more interested in stopping Syria's conflict than Yemen's. We came out to the United Nations today to call for our human rights and to denounce this unprecedented massacre that took place yesterday at the Morning Hall. Where are the human rights? Where is the UN? Where is the world? We call for the forming of an international independent committee to investigate the crimes of the Saudi aggressors, the crimes they have committed against the Yemeni people, and the latest of these crimes is the mother of them all, the crime at the funeral hall, which happened yesterday. The Saudis said they're not guilty of the attack, which was caught on film, and they've promised an investigation. Meanwhile, a White House spokesman said America's support of Saudi Arabia did not amount to a blank check. The Yemen civil war has killed more than 10,000 people and displaced more than 3 million.
We need justice, we need freedom, chant anti-government protesters across Ethiopia. And this week, American agricultural expert Sharon Gray was killed when protesters threw stones at her car. At least 52 died a week ago when police opened fire at a protest, leading to a deadly stampede. The fight against the government has even spread overseas. At the Olympics in Rio, Ethiopian silver medal winner Fayisa Lelesa raised his arms in a protest salute. Back home, until recently, Ethiopia had been regarded as an island of stability, surrounded by unstable Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan. The US sees Ethiopia as a key ally in the region and annually hands out just under $1 billion in aid. And the capital, Addis Ababa, is the center of African power, with President Obama drawn to address the continent's leaders at the headquarters of the African Union. In the streets nearby, the majority Oromo and Amhara ethnic groups believe their freedom and rights are being squeezed by the minority Tigray, who represent only 6% of the population and yet are the sole party in power. It's a potentially explosive situation.
The United States and the United Kingdom have both issued security alerts to their citizens in Egypt. They want citizens to stay away from large gatherings in public spaces on Sunday. And that comes as Egypt prepares to mark the anniversary of clashes between security forces and Coptic Christians back in 2011.
The national dialogue is seen as a major step towards reconciling opposition factions across Sudan. Leaders of Chad, Egypt, Mauritania, Ethiopia and Uganda are expected to call on the Sudanese government and rebels to accept a peace plan. Sudan has been in conflict for more than a decade. The UN estimates that more than 300,000 people have been killed and more than 3 million displaced. Fighting broke out between government forces and rebels in the Darfur region in 2003. The rebels accused the Sudanese government of marginalizing them. Peace deals have been signed in the past, but the conflict continues. The dialogue conference follows a report by Amnesty International that accuses the Sudanese government of using chemical weapons in the Darfur region. The rights group says up to 250 people may have died from chemical exposure. The Sudanese government has denied the claims. President Omar al-Bashir faces charges at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity and genocide in the Darfur conflict. But after years of war, the people of Sudan will be hoping that these new talks just might help to bring an end to the long fight.
After the morning gathering of 6th Muharram in Karachi, these people marched towards the city center Numai Square in protest against what they call a slow Shia genocide. Shia Muslims blame the federal and provincial governments for their failure and tolerating the banned terrorist outfits. Despite the death of 85,000 Pakistanis who fell victim to this policy of double standards. Earlier this week, a bus was stopped in the provincial capital of Balochistan and 6 Shia Hazara women were murdered, while on Friday in Karachi, a Shia father and his son, as well as a morning gathering of ladies, were targeted. Mansoor Zaidi, the father, was killed and others were critically wounded.
The government is not serious, period. Now the international community is telling us to abandon pick and choose among good and bad Taliban? Tell me of one single community that they have spared in Pakistan. No one.
In Afghanistan, the number of war-displaced civilians in the city of Kunduz has more than doubled as street battles persist a week after the Taliban stormed in. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says around 24,000 internally displaced residents have been fleeing explosions and gunfights into neighboring provinces. It also says that with many families on the move, this figure will certainly change. Kunduz residents have faced crippling shortages of food and medicine after the Taliban launched the all-out assault last Monday. Afghan forces have struggled to flush the militants out, with the government saying the clearance operation is being carefully carried out to prevent civilian casualties.
Silence on the streets of Srinagar. Here in this main city of Indian-administered Kashmir, people are forced to remain indoors, sometimes for weeks, under rolling curfews and a communications blackout. These shops have remained shut for 3 months. Businesses and most banks across the Muslim-majority Himalayan region have also not opened since July. Neither have schools and universities. Children have nowhere to go. The region erupted in violent protests after popular rebel leader Burhan Wani was killed by Indian soldiers on July 8. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets, demanding an end to Indian rule. Since then, at least 91 people have been killed and 12,000 injured in clashes between police and protesters. On Friday, hundreds of people protested again. Soldiers fired tear gas and shotgun pellets, and a 12-year-old boy was killed. At the boy's funeral the following day, soldiers again opened fire on mourners, injuring at least 30, and a curfew was reimposed. The government crackdown to stall the protests has been harsh. police have detained thousands of suspected protesters and many are on the run, fearing arrest. The government says curbs on people's movement and the use of force is necessary to bring peace to Kashmir.
In Mali, a Tuareg militant leader, Cheikh Ag Assousa, has been killed in a car explosion in the city of Kidal. He had just been holding talks on the deteriorating security situation in the country with French and UN troops. A security source suggested his death was simply an accident, his car driving over a landmine. However, a leading member of the Arab Azawad movement, having witnessed the explosion, said a device had been planted in the car. Usa was a senior commander in the allied group Coordination of Azawad Movements, which has clashed sporadically with rival pro-government forces since a power-sharing deal in place since February began to crumble.
Libya now, and forces loyal to the unity government continue to advance on ISIL militants in the city of Sirte. At the weekend, troops retook 2 more streets from the militants. The fighting has been ongoing for months now. Libyan forces literally have to take back street by street from ISIL. The latest fighting has taken place in the city's neighborhood 3 district. ISIL still controls a tiny sliver of the city. The forces loyal to the Libyan government are backed by US airstrikes.
Bangladeshi forces have killed 12 suspected Islamist extremists in Ghazipur district, just outside the capital Dhaka. Included among the dead is the new leader of a banned group behind the Dhaka Cafe massacre. Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan says 7 of the extremists were killed in a gunfight after they rejected an offer to surrender. The outlawed group, Jamiatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, killed 22 people, mostly foreign hostages, at the cafe in July. It was the deadliest in a series of assaults claimed by Islamist groups that have blighted Bangladesh in the past 3 years.
New data shows that the Islamic State militant group has lost more than a quarter of the territory it once controlled in Syria and Iraq. According to the security and defense analyst IHS Conflict Monitor, ISIL's control has shrunk by 28% since its peak in January of last year. They now control 65,500 square kilometers. However, the data also show that their losses had slowed in the last 3 months.
Marking an escalation of conflict in the area where Syrian rebels, backed by Turkey, are fighting the jihadists, the Turkish military said on Sunday that 38 Islamic State militants were killed in northern Syria over the last 24 hours. Supported by Turkish tanks and airstrikes in an operation launched in late August, rebels have been pushing towards the Islamic State stronghold of Dabik. The Turkish army said in a statement, 14 of the IS fighters were killed as they attempted to enter the rebel-controlled villages of Akhtarin and Turkmenbare, 3 kilometers east of Dabik. On Saturday, the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that ISIS fighters had captured those villages in a counterattack near the Turkish border. The Turkish military statement contradicted this account.
A truck bombing at a military outpost has killed at least 18 people and wounded dozens more in Turkey. 10 soldiers and 8 civilians died in the blast when suspected Kurdish militants detonated a 5-ton bomb in the southeast of the country. The attack occurred in the Durak outpost 20 kilometers from the town of Shemdinli, on the border with Iraq and Iran. The Hakkari province is one of the main flashpoint areas in the 3-decade-long conflict between Ankara and the militant Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK.
A Palestinian gunman who fired from a car has killed a pedestrian and a police officer in Jerusalem. Israeli police said that he was then shot dead by one of their officers in a chase through the streets. 4 others were also wounded by the gunman. Later, the Palestinian's body was removed from the scene. The attack began near Israel's National Police headquarters, police said.
A terrorist opened fire and shot 1 woman, and then he continued in a vehicle in the streets of Jerusalem. He was chased by police special patrol units on a fast motorbike. Shots were then fired at our police officers on their motorbikes, who responded and shot and killed the terrorist.
Police identified the gunman as a 39-year-old from East Jerusalem who is due to start a 4-month jail sentence next week for assaulting a police officer. Authorities had warned of violence as the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement, approaches.
The South Korean military is on high alert for any provocations as North Korea marks the 71st anniversary of the founding of its Workers' Party on Monday. Sunday was the 10th anniversary of North Korea's first nuclear test, but no unusual activity was detected at the Punggye nuclear test site. Analysts say there are three types of provocations the North could forge ahead with: a nuclear test, a long-range ballistic missile test, or a missile launch from a mobile launch pad. A long-range missile launch is considered highly unlikely, as the North has stated it'll notify the relevant international authorities prior to any firing, which they have not done. South Korea has noted that another nuclear test is a possibility, following the regime's most recent test in early September. South Korea's military authorities also say there is a possibility North Korea could suddenly launch a medium-range Dodong or Musudan missile from a mobile launch pad. But there are also experts who believe the day will pass without a provocation. They note that restoration work following the worst flooding the North has seen in decades has yet to be completed. They also say Pyongyang will most likely wait to see what punishment the UN Security Council hands down for its September 9th nuclear test.
The United States has deployed one of its nuclear-powered aircraft carriers to South Korea for a joint naval drill which began today. A U.S. military official said the USS Ronald Reagan will participate in the 6-day Invincible Spirit drill. This is the first time the Allies have engaged in exercises on all coasts of the peninsula at the same time. The Allies have mobilized dozens of warships and submarines for the drill in a show of force against North Korea's recent nuclear and missile provocations and the potential belligerence that is quite likely, as today is also the anniversary of the founding of the North's Workers' Party. The U.S. plans to continue sending major strategic weapons to South Korea to intensify the military pressure on Pyongyang.